friends, May Flaum here for Jesse James Beads, and I have got one design to show you 3 different ways. So essentially the idea behind this design, and it's a very common one, is just to have your clasp or have a loop or a connector of some type offset on one side and create a piece that is not symmetrical. I am starting off here with the Holiday Pop Mix, and I've sorted out the beads based on the beads that I think would work. I've also got a little clasp there. Any clasp would do. The only other thing we're going to need for this necklace is some crimp beads there and some stringing wire. I'm just going ahead and setting this up and making sure that my wires are not crossed so that I can properly get our little crimp tool in here and crimp that into place nicely. Now that we could end the video right here. So for this first version, I'm going to show you 3 different versions. They're all different. For this first one, it's very basic. We're just going to string the beads along, and I'm making almost more of a choker, just a little longer than a choker length necklace. And I'm putting a gold seed bead from Jesse James Beads in between each bead that I can, only because I think that it just looks a little nicer, that little bit of space, that little bit of gold to tie everything together. And then once you get to the end, you're repeating with the crimp bead, pulling it through the other end of the clasp and making sure the wires are not crossed and crimping it on down and making sure you have enough room there that you've left at the end so that your clasp can actually move around as need be. As you can see, that's the part where you're smoothing it down and around with the little part in the front, and you'd be done. Or if you want to make a nice big loop and do something else, if you want to do a little bit of wire wrapping, you could take one of the dangly pieces. I'm also going to take one of the bows here, and you could wire wrap yourself a little charm onto one end of the clasp. So I am just wrapping this around the base there just a couple times, 2-3 times, and then trimming off the edge. And then I'm going to put a few gold seed beads on here just to give it needs to have a little bit of length, just because the clasp and the necklace and everything are so short and so tight. It's going to need a little bit of length. Once you do that, you're just going to, I've got my round nose pliers out there. You're just going to twist the other end of the loop, and you'll notice that I slide everything on before wire wrapping around. That's just so I don't have to utilize jump rings or anything. I can just get everybody into place and where it needs to be, then add the couple of wire wraps around there as it fits, as it needs to be, so that everything is held down and in place and lovely. And there, once again, you're going to grab onto the loop and then twist the wire around. I'm using 22 gauge wire today. All of the projects are going to use 22 gauge wire. And again, this would be a step you could skip. I just thought it would be fun to go ahead and add this on in here. If you like wire wrapping, you're in for a treat, because this time, this necklace, we're just doing it this once, and I'm going to trim this off and we're done and we're moving on. But we're going to use that 22 gauge wire a couple more times here in the other versions of this necklace. So this strictly uses Holiday Pop and gold seed beads. That's it. And I love how these mixes from Jesse James Beads, I absolutely love how they go together and how there's so many different materials and textures and sizes. It just makes for such an interesting necklace, and I really love how it looks on here. As you can see, the piece is full of color and pop, and just such a fun one. Now I'm going to take this idea and mix it up a little bit with Mountain Mistletoe, another of the Jesse James Beads holiday mixes. And this time I'm using artistic wire, 22 gauge, in a beautiful, look at this beautiful red color. Also available at Jesse James Beads. I'm going to just go ahead and cut quite a bit of this, because this one is going to be a lot of wire wrapping. We're wire wrapping every single bead. So here's what I'm doing. I'm just going through with my round nose pliers and making the one end of the loop. And this little bow that's in the kit, it has a little loop at the top and bottom, which means it's going to connect two different pieces. And I just got through saying how the one idea here is the connector, the offset connector off to one side. And in this case, it's going to be our little bow that's going to be our inspiration for the design. And I'm just going to wrap my wire around there, and that's going to start. Now, if my wire loop is not going the right way, we can adjust that. We can change that as need be. I'm going to really wait to address that unless I'm absolutely sure it's a problem until later. Sometimes I am wrong. Let's just say it. It happens to the best of us. Sometimes I'm wrong and I think we've got an issue and we really don't. So here's how this is going to work. We are just wire wrapping, and if you've done this before, well, then you know exactly the drill. If you haven't, this is a great practice because you're going to do the same skill over and over and over again. Wire wrap the one end onto the neck, onto the bead below or above, then add your beads. Then at the top or at the bottom, depending on which direction you're going to create a loop with your round nose pliers. And then you are going to go ahead and wire wrap that top. You're just going to wrap it around and then use your bent nose pliers to make sure that any wire extra or any pokey spots are handled and tucked in properly. And then, you guessed it, the next one, make a loop, slide the previous one on, and go from there. So for this design, I'm leaving the entire kit right there in the little dish that you see, and I'm designing as I go, and I love that. I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, what would I like to see next? Well, what would I like to see next to this one? And picking 1 bead, 3 beads, 5 beads, it can be different every time. Some are bigger, some are smaller, and putting those on there, and then you guessed it, turning my wire, making my loop. And this is why I say this is a great one. If you are not experienced in wire working and wire wrapping, this is a great one because this is a beginner skill that we need to have. And you're just going to do that over and over and over again. And you might notice when I start, a lot of times I leave a little more extra than I strictly need. That's not an accident. Sometimes I have some issues with my wrist, and having a little more wire means that I have to put a little less pressure, and it helps me out just a little bit. So as you can see, we are just making our way here all the way around until we have enough that we would like. Now, you don't have to go all the way around the necklace. If you would like, you could have a bit of chain on there. You could have strung beads. There's certainly a lot of options to be had. Here you can see I'm nearly done. This took a little over an hour, but you know, it went a lot faster than I assumed it would go. I just sat down and watched a show, and you guessed it, wire wrapped and wire wrapped and wire wrapped. Now, the other thing I will tell you, as someone who is not the world's most expert wire wrapper, the other really great thing about this design is if while you're working, I don't know, you grab something, you smush something, some of your wire gets a little wonky, you can straighten it all up at the end. Do not worry. It's very, very forgiving. And I absolutely love that about doing this because I was worried that I was going to mess it up. And then there was a couple times where something got crooked, but guess what? I could straighten it all out each and every time. And just repeating those steps, trimming the wire, then going around, making sure that there's no pokey wire, making sure everything is tucked in nicely, and you guessed it, repeat. Now, once we get to the end, what we are going to do, you can use a jump ring if you would like. As you can see me do here, is just use a jump ring and attach your clasp. And if you need a little bit of chain at the end or want a little bit of chain at the end, I didn't want the wire wrapping going behind my neck, so I put a little bit of chain on the back there, and then I have got my clasp so that I can get it over my head, of course. And boom, we have necklace idea number 2. This one, I would say it's my favorite, but I gotta tell you, they're all my favorites because now we've got idea number 3. And let me tell you, winter solstice is a personal favorite, and this design is a favorite too. So we've gone once, we've gone twice. Now we're going to take that same idea of the offset. In the first one, it was my clasp and it was more of a choker, but it's kind of an offset where the clasp is meant to be off to the side in the front. And then the second one, it's the bow that's offset, and that's the kind of offset one. Now, third time's the charm, or I think they're all charming. So we're just going to make another third necklace. We're going to level it up again. This time I have a silver loop that, there we go. There's our thing, but we actually are going to have two on this one, and we're going to have two strands of beads. So what I'm doing here is kind of sorting out and making a plan, because I do want to plan this one out a bit. I do want to see what beads I have and what things look good with what. This kit is so full of snowflakes and sparkle and just total beauty. So back to the technique of necklace one, if I can get my crimp bead to cooperate with me, we're going to use a crimp tube there to go through the wire and set up the end there. And again, remember, we don't want it super, super tight. And I'm going to check and make sure that my wires are not crossed, that everything is good before I go ahead and crimp that into place. Now, one way I always check is if I'm holding the one end and I'm pulling and nothing's happening, then I know they're twisted. If they're not twisted, it'll move around. Anyhow, everybody seems to be behaving for me on this piece today, which is very exciting. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure, yep, get everybody correct. And I left this part in there because I know a lot of us have trouble with, or have to take a little extra time on this. So I always want to show that. And you can always put a cover. If you want a crimp cover, you can always put one of those on there. All right, so here we go. And I've got a bigger bead, and you know what? This is what I love about stringing wire. If I put a big bead down there and say, oh, it's going right over the crimp, well, I'll just put a smaller one. I'll just switch that design just a tiny bit. It's so easy though, so forgiving, and honestly, it's a lot of fun to me because I can just go ahead and play and enjoy. And I know if the worst case scenario when I'm using the bead stringing wire like this is, the worst case scenario is I don't like it, I let them all fall off, and I try again. I love that I don't have to waste material. I love that I can keep looking at it and enjoying the process, playing with it, saying, do I like this? Do I like that? Well, I'll tell you right now, I love every single bead in this kit. This particular mix, oh my gosh. I mean, every time I think I have a favorite in here, I look again and there's another favorite. And another, and another. I mean, look at this one that was just in my fingers. It's just, they're all so incredible. And this one, I'm not putting any kind of spacer beads or anything. I'm just going for it, going big and chunky and using up the beads there in that particular mix, the winter solstice, which again, personal favorite. It just is. I'm loving playing. I love all of these ones today, though. I'll be honest, they're all my favorites. Now, once we get to the other end, yes, we have a star. This is from the kit. So we have a star that we're going to use as our connector on this side. And we're just going to put our crimp bead on through and repeat the process now that we've done several times before. Hopefully nice and easy. And again, remembering that we don't want it super, super tight. We do want it to have a little bit of room. And once we have that crimp in place, and again, if you wanted to put a cover on there, you certainly could. Now we're going to start with, we're going back to wire wrapping. So these are just the two different techniques that I love to use the most with this kind of a design. And I love the idea of how different all of these designs look while we're using very simple techniques to put it all together. And I'm also keeping the supply list incredibly short. We're really making the most of the mix that we're working with. We're not bringing in a whole bunch of outside stuff. It's very minimal. So I've got the wire, this is again 22 gauge, and I've got that on the star on the same end as my other beads because I'm going to now make the second and shorter strand for this. And the reason I'm going to be doing that is honestly, what inspired me here is we have these snowflake connectors that we're going to be able to do, and it's just so lovely. I absolutely adore these. They're so cute. And just like the bow from the previous necklace, we're just going to have this go on to the loop of one end of a wire wrapped bead. And same process, we're going to grab the loop, we're going to twist it around, we're going to cut off the excess, etc., etc. And we're just going to repeat for however many of these little snowflakes that we would like to have. In this case, we're going to put 3 as well as an assortment of wire wrap beads that I held back from the original strand, knowing that I was going to be going this direction. I held back ones that I thought would be particularly lovely. And one of the things I love about this is it's just letting me feature even more beads from this mix. It's letting me put even more things together. Now I am going to regularly check, okay, is this straight? Is the wire loop for my snowflake facing correctly so that it's going to lay correctly? I am regularly checking all of these things. This is the slowest of the necklaces. It's a slower process. And then when I'm ready to lay it out and double check, is my length good? I'm going to be really patient with myself and with my necklace. I'm really going to sit here and make sure that the wires are not crossed or over each other, or you see how they're kind of getting together there. I'm going to make sure it's all set before I wire wrap the final bead onto my silver loop on the other side. And I'm not worried if things are getting funky down there on my strand. I'm not worried if they get a little funky down there while I set this up. I'm just making sure it's correct before I start. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to make 2 different little dangles with snowflakes because this necklace is pretty over the top. And I will be honest, I am going to wear this to Disney World with a Frozen shirt or sweatshirt or something, maybe some Frozen Mickey ears. This is going to be my Queen Elsa necklace, and I am excited. I will wear it before then, of course, but I am excited about this one. It just is giving me all the Queen Elsa Frozen vibes, and I just think it's so much fun, but it's also just such a beautiful mix for winter, and there's so many things you can do with this mix. I feel like I need 10 more to explore all of the ideas in my head. And yes, we've got our one little dangle there with a snowflake. I'm adding a second one now onto here, and I am regularly checking and picking up my pieces and draping them on myself or on my mannequin here in the studio and making sure that things are sitting correctly, that I'm happy with how things are, and so on and so forth, just to make sure I really like everything. Now our last step is we're going to use some silver chain across the back because again, I don't want to put these beads behind my neck, I don't think. I just want a bit of silver chain. Now on the one side, I'm going to wire wrap a single bead. I love those beads. And get my chain on here. And then on the other side, I am going to add a clasp. It is long enough. Well, it is long enough technically that I could set it over my head. But whenever I'm making a necklace and it's close, if it should or should not have a clasp, if it's long enough or not, whenever I'm creating in that zone, which is almost always because it's the necklace lengths that I prefer for myself, I always make sure to just go ahead and put a clasp. So on this end, I'm just adding a jump ring for there we go. I've got my little toggle there to hold on to things, and then it's on the chain on the other end. And I'm just making sure how everything's going to fit and that I'm going to have enough room for everybody. Add a little bead, and you guessed it, we are done. So how did you like seeing 3 totally different necklaces, but all inspired by the same jewelry design idea in one video. Please let us know. We would love to hear from you. Would love to hear what kind of tutorials you would like to see next. We are always over here creating and having a good time. Thank you to Jesse James Beads for having me. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of their videos.